Hello there, people of the internet. How is everybody doing today? I'm doing alright, thanks for asking. This is not me teaching you how to reload. This right here is just a video talking about the benefits of learning how to reload, and if you want to get into it, this is a really cheap and easy way to be able to do so. A lot of people are really intimidating by reloading, and you definitely do not have to be. So, I think that to start off this video, I'm going to just go ahead and talk about what it is that I was actually doing. I was sitting around watching some YouTube, and I have this little hand-loading press right here, and it's so convenient to have this thing. It's a little Lee hand-loading press, and they're like, oh, I don't know, $55, $60 or so. You get yourself one of these, and you can just sit in front of a TV and whatnot, and all you do is you take this and you just squeeze it down like that, and you're loading ammunition just like that. It is such an easy, convenient way to load ammo without needing a huge setup and benches and vices and all that crap. This right here is primarily what I use for loading the things that I load for the YouTube channel. That being said, you're probably not going to load match grade ammo with something like this, but if you're fine with just loading some ammo so you have some stuff to take out to a range, in my case I'm loading it for YouTube videos and I shoot garbage at like 10 yards, which, you know, this is more than adequate for. If you're fine with that, then this right here might be something up your alley. Of course, if you want match grade ammo, you know, 1-inch groups at 1,000 yards, then you might want to get something a little bit more precise than this right here. So if you're going to get into reloading, this right here is a couple of main benefits and a couple of, what would I call it? A couple of tips. I'm just going to call them tips for lack of better terminology. I cannot show the actual loading process because YouTube does not like that, so I'm sorry, but I simply cannot do that. It's part of YouTube's rules and regulations, but I can talk about it. So if you're going to get into reloading, one of the big benefits of reloading is lower cost of ammo, especially nowadays, unless you're loading like 9mm or 223, in which case you're going to break about even. But if you're loading literally anything else, you're going to have a much lower cost of ammo. As a matter of fact, I got these right here that I loaded. These are 38 Special, and these are primarily what I load just because they're super simple to load, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But 38 Special is primarily what I load. I load them with this right here, Tight Group. As a matter of fact, this right here is going to be a running theme for this video. We'll get more into that in a second. 38 Special, I recommend people learn how to load 38 Special and then shoot it in a 357 Magnum. Don't try hot rodding anything. Don't do anything like that. If you're learning, then just do the borderline basics. So I tell people to learn to load 38 Special and shoot it in a 357. This way, if they do something wrong, that the 357 firing a much lower power cartridge is going to be much more tolerant than anything else. If you try loading, say, 30-06 and shooting it in a 30-06 and then you do something wrong and you get a catastrophic failure, suddenly half your face is gone, so we definitely don't want that. So, first things first, you're going to need yourself some sort of press. In my particular case, I got this little cheapo hand press. I don't need a bench or anything. I literally just sit on the couch and load ammo, and I loaded like 100 rounds of 38 Special in like 10 minutes, and it was really not a big deal at all. You're going to need a press, and you're going to need a scale of some kind. This way you can weigh out how much gunpowder it is that you're using. Then you just need your other things like your dyes and your components for the ammo and whatnot. For my handgun cartridges, and if you're learning how to load, use handgun cartridges. They're a really good, easy way to learn how to load, especially because handgun cartridges, the brass does not stretch nearly as much because there's not nearly as much pressure inside of that cartridge, so you can load the same brass like 4, 5, 6, 7, possibly even more times before you actually have to get around to trimming it and whatnot. Now, that being said, 38 Special burns at a very low pressure. It's a very safe cartridge to use, but it burns at an incredibly low pressure, and the brass really doesn't stretch all that much. So you can reload your 38 Special brass repeatedly. Like, I think I do mine, like, hell, I've done some as much as 15 times worth of reloads without trimming them or anything, especially if you're loading them in a 357 Magnum, because the chamber in that 357 Magnum is designed to compensate for a far longer case than 38 Special. So you can get a lot of reloading and a lot of shooting done in something like that. Now, if you're going to reload 38 special and shoot it in a 38 special, that is where you start to run into needing to pay more attention to things like that. But if you're wanting to learn to reload, 38 special from a 357 Magnum is one of the easiest because you don't really have to do anything with the brass. Like you continue to shoot it until it starts really showing some signs, like this one right here. You can see I got some significant signs of some pretty good stretching on this. So this case is probably going to be retired before too terribly long. I might run it another time or two, but that's about it. So you're going to need some kind of gunpowder, and I recommend this stuff right here if you're going with pistol cartridges, because this stuff, tight group, it doesn't care about case volume size. It just all immediately burns all at once. Now that means you're going to get high pressures, and that's fine for pistol cartridges, and I have seen these used in shotguns as well, but we'll probably conclude that in another video. But it's not something that you would want for a rifle cartridge, because you would just get way too high of pressure spikes. That said, you can use these in rifle cartridges. I have. But in order to avoid high pressure spikes, you have to use a low pressure charge, so you're just going to get underpowered ammunition, but it does work. Whenever you are using powder for reloading, you just kind of look at the thing, and more often than not, they're going to have what it is that you need to know about loading specific things. Like if I'm loading, for example, 38 Special, I use 3.8 grains of powder, which is the weight of the powder that we use, and we measure that with the scale. And that is for a 158 grain projectile, which is one of the more common grain weights of 38 Special. Like, I think all my 38 Special rounds use 158 grains. So that right there tells you what bullet you're using and how much gunpowder you need for your specific cartridge. In this case, 38 Special. 357 Magnum, 7.5 at a 125. So if you're using a lighter grain projectile, there you go. There are different, what would you call them? Different charts and whatnot that you can look up online if you're using a different weight bullet, and it'll tell you, that particular amount of powder that you need for that particular bullet with whatever it is that you're using. But this right here is just a really good go-to because this is literally what I use. So there's a bunch of different information on there. There's different velocities and different all sorts of things on there. But for the most part, whenever I do 38 Special, I just do 158 grain, and then I do that recommended dosage. And this right here, I bought this for 32 bucks. It might be a little bit more now. We got ourselves a powder shortage upcoming. But either way, not very expensive, and I can get a lot of loadings out of this. I can probably get over 1,000 rounds worth of ammo out of one of these right here. Tight group is just such an efficient powder. You need very, very small amounts, like under 4 grains levels of gunpowder inside of your cartridge to send that lead downrange effectively. That's what makes this so good. You can stretch that out for a really long way. So on our press right here, one of the things I do is, well, one of the things that I did back whenever I had first gotten this is the first thing I did was I got a 30-06 shell retainer for this thing. So the beauty about 30-06 is there's a lot of cases out there that are designed off 30-06 or close enough to work in a 30-06 shell holder. Like other than rimmed cartridge like 303 Brit and 7.62 by 54 rimmed, or like a really large rim cartridge like 4570 or 44 Magnum or something like that. For the most part, most of my cartridges that I use are usable in this 30-06 shell retainer. Like, for example, earlier when I was doing it, I put my 38 Special inside there, and it held just fine. And that was how I was loading that. Works well with 45 ACP as well, if you want to use that. Hell, it works well with, this is a 6.5 Carcano cartridge. I'll use this 30-06 shell holder for my 6.5 Carcano whenever I put that in. Now, this is a 30-06 or a 38 Special crimp die on there, so I'm not going to actually ram that home. But bottom line is, this works for a good number of things. I reload my Carcano rounds, I reload my 8mm Mauser and 7mm Mauser, I reload my Jap rounds, I reload my 6.5 Swede and 7.5 Swiss. I reload a lot of things using this 30-06 shell holder right here, and of course 30-06 and 308. So there's a lot of different cartridges out there that you can hold with this one thing, and it's like 10 bucks. At least that's what I got this one for. So that is definitely well worth it. So we got the press, which is like, we'll call it $50 or so. You could probably get them cheaper if you find them used. Press $50, shell holder $10, that's $60, and then a scale for like another, I don't know, $10 or so. So for like under $100, you could get into reloading. You got all the equipment here. You would need to get yourself whatever dies it is that you need. And then, well, there you go. Now, there are different ways to do what I like to call poor man reloading, where you don't use a bunch of different dies and whatnot. I know there's been multiple times where I just didn't have the die for something, so I kind of made things work. And this right here is an example of that. I have this nail that I kind of took a bench grinder to and grinded it down. And what I do is whenever I have myself a spent handgun casing, gotta measure it out, make sure that everything is close enough in spec to where you can actually use this cartridge. But with handgun casings, it's more often than not going to be. You might have to use a sizing die on them if they measure out improperly. But I use that nail, and then I poke out the primer just like that right there, with this little pinhole right there. And that's just one of the ways that I use to get around not having that particular tool. Now, granted, I do have that particular tool now. This right here is just one of the things that I did whenever I didn't have that. I used this right here is a socket for a ratchet, and I would literally just take the 38 special round and put it on top of there, and I'd just tap out that primer with a little mallet and something like that. And then I got my scale, measure the powder out. I just used a spoon. I used a spoon, and I would use the cap on the tight group resting on this thing, and that is how I measured that out. Then I got my powder and I got my primer. I had a actual primer seeder. Lee makes them to where you can actually like it's a hand priming tool. I think that's what it's called. And you squeeze the primer in. It's very, very easy to do. Very, very cheap to get your hands on. So there's another really good example of being able to reload for not a whole lot of money. I think I got that one for like $7 or so. But it's a hand priming tool. It's not very fast, not very efficient, not very glamorous, but there you go. Now you got your hand priming tool to be able to put a primer in there, then you got your powder measured out, and then you pour that in there. I recommend getting yourself some kind of funnel. I have up here a Lee loading funnel, but of course you can use whatever funnel it is that you have, or you don't even need one if you can manage to aim well enough to get it in there. Pour your powder in, and then you seat your bullet. A lot of times, what I will find is that if you seat your bullet using a actual die and whatnot, that works out well. But a lot of times, whenever I actually fire the cartridge, the brass will actually be slightly expanded to the point to where you can take the bullet and essentially just push it right into the brass. You don't need the die or anything like that. Of course, that being said, you want to make sure that it is seated well enough to where you're not going to have it improperly seated. And that's just something that you get from experiencing over time. You just learn where the bullet is supposed to be seated. And that is going to be very inconsistent. It's not going to yield very good accuracy. And if you have a bullet that is not seated properly and right where it needs to be, then that could potentially even be a safety issue. So don't do that unless you have experience with the cartridge. Like I just know with the types of bullets that I use, I know exactly where they need to be. And a lot of times I just freaking eyeball that shit. And I'll take that bullet and I'll just push it in to about where it needs to be with my finger. And then you need to get yourself a crimp die. There's no getting around that one. Got to get yourself a crimp die to be able to crimp the bullet to the actual case to stop the bullet from moving around whenever you load it into a magazine or something like that. You don't want that to be moving around under recoil or anything like that. So that is, for all intents and purposes, a good vivid description of getting started reloading for not a lot of money. As a matter of fact, it is a incredibly cheap way to start reloading. I recommend using pistol cases or handgun cartridges or something like that, some kind of low power cartridge that doesn't stretch the brass all that much, so you can get multiple loadings out of that same brass. Now, if you're going to be going with old school cartridges like, no, I don't know, I got a 3040 Craig, and the pressures on that are pretty gosh darn low, so I don't really have to worry about that stretching brass all that much either. Or old school 3030 Winchester, that really doesn't stretch brass all that much either. So you can load those cartridges like 3 or 4 times before you end up having to actually size and trim your case. And, well, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, or you don't really want to learn how to do that, or you don't want to invest in the tools and whatnot to do that, then you get yourself a couple of loads onto those low-powered cases, or get yourself a 38 Special and load these over and over and over and over and over for basically not a lot of money. Really good setup, really good way to learn how to actually load, and hopefully you guys learned something. So this is it for me. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I will see you guys on the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.